Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is an open meeting of the Meeting Finance Committee. I'm Joshua Levy, Committee Chair. It's Wednesday, February 9th, 2022, and the meeting is being conducted in a hybrid manner, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless the law requires it. This meeting will not have public comment except in connection with the first item of business, citizen request to address the Finance Committee. First, I'll confirm that a quorum of the members of the Finance Committee are present. When I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. John Connolly.
Here.
Jim Healy.
Here.
Rick Lunetta.
Here.
Louise Miller.
Here.
Dick Riley.
Here.
And the chair is here. As a reminder, anything you share will be a matter of public record. The first item on the agenda is citizen request to address the Finance Committee. If there's anyone you'd like to address, I don't see anyone online or in the room. So we'll move on to the next. Oh, and Barry Kaufman has just joined. Barry, can you hear us?
I can.
Perfect. We're just taking attendance.
Okay.
Do you want to do it on the
Yeah.
citizens?
Yeah, so if there's any citizen who'd like to address the Finance Committee, please raise your hand. You can also press *9 if you're on a phone. I do not see anyone on at the moment. Okay, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes of the prior meeting, February 2nd, 2022. Does anyone have any comments?
I move their approval.
I'll second them.
Okay, we'll take a roll call. John,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Barry.
Yes.
The chair votes yes.
Oh, it must have been that exciting that he left.
It wasn't who he expected. All right.
So the main.
Am I the only one remote?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
There might, yeah, I don't know if anyone else is expected to be remote.
No.
Okay.
Tom's away. I don't know about Carol. I think, no, Carol's coming, I think.
So we'll go into the first item, well, the really only substantial item of business, the fiscal year 2022 budget. I would propose, before we get into it, propose that we kind of begin by moving line by line according to the order of previous budgets and as presented by the Director of Finance. And then it doesn't, we can come back to it. Come back to other lines if we need to at a later time, but just to start.
Hey, Josh, I'm just gonna grab my computer. Sorry, I have to do this. I don't have internet, Wi-Fi where I am, so I just, I'm on my phone, but I do have my computer with the schedule. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
No worries. I'll just continue with these suggestions. If people disagree, feel free to let me know. And then I guess we all know that our discussions are focused on budget requests, the department manager presentations, town manager's recommendations, other financial priorities. And I would just ask where there's any disagreement on a particular funding recommendation. I think it would just be helpful to clearly delineate if the disagreement is on the merits of the request, the funding mechanism, such as whether it's within or outside the budget, and the funding source, like the tax levy, free cash, or overlay surplus. So I guess there's no disagreement with that. You can start with townwide expenses. The first line item is casualty, liability, property, and self-insurance program. Any discussion about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Debt service. Any discussion? Group health insurance, employee benefits, administrative costs.
So, yeah, go ahead.
That just, in effect, since that reflects all of the ESR 4 requests, perhaps we ought to leave that off and circle back to it based on what we conclude.
Yeah. Need an electric, light, and gas program. Retiree insurance and insurance liability funds.
Does that pick up some of the
Yes.
personnel costs too?
To your point, I would think that you want to have the group insurance, the retiree insurance, insurance liability fund, and workers' compensation hold those until you decide what you're doing with the rest of the budget.
Yeah, we can hold those until later.
So,
Or we
but
can
can
come
we,
back to it.
so we're gonna hold those, we'll come back to a discussion?
Sorry, no, I want to, if there are any questions or discussions now, I think we should have them, but I think we need to come back to them eventually anyway.
Okay, so I think with respect to OPEB, I think one of the things that is important for us to understand is that OPEB is directly related to the head count that the town has. So unlike retiree retiree liability, where other communities will actually pitch in for the retirement contribution for each employee, for OPEB, it's really based upon where they happen to be at the time that they retire. And so that is something when we consider new FTEs, we need to think about what the effect is on other line items, and it's can be a significant effect over time with respect to OPEB liability. And I think that's something that we really haven't focused on at all in the last few years as headcount has increased.
And that's going to be delayed in the sense that, I mean, like health insurance costs.
It is, but your liability is based on your head count. So as your head count goes up, your liability increases. What you end up paying for depends upon whether they retire from your community or not. But your liability is based upon your head count.
But I think what Josh is saying is that isn't in this budget. The additional FTEs are not reflected in.
Well,
this
but it
number.
is because we keep adjusting our OPEB contribution, and it keeps adjusting based upon head count.
You do an actuarial adjustment.
Exactly, every time. And so we just need, I'm just saying that we need to think
Yeah.
about that, especially since some, and I know that Dick, I know you guys all know how I feel about reserves.
But that's the reason why we pulled it off the table, those three items, because we can in fact address it
Okay.
based on the increased headcount. I don't think there's any question about the underlying OPEB.
So I think
Sure.
that there is.
Okay, I
In
don't
general,
understand
I
it
think
then.
we're putting a lot of money into OPEB, which I think we should, but I think that at some point, we need to reevaluate how we're determining what we're putting into OPEB.
My understanding is based on the actual liabilities we have. It's not a projection. It's based on the costs that we have incurred for the health costs of these retirees.
It's part of it.
It's the current cost and future cost actuarially determined.
Yeah.
And we're funding per the schedule, and something that we require, that when people require a head count, they have to show what the benefit costs are, and one of the benefit costs, which they have to come to me to get, is OPEB. So if there's an increase in a benefit eligible position, there's an increased cost to our OPEB, which is reflected if you approve, if the town approves an additional benefited position.
So,
But
but I
these are
guess,
for actual people employed or to be employed specifically. It's not an estimate of who might be employed in the future, correct?
Correct, it's like, as Louise was saying, it's based on your head count at the time.
Yeah.
But we have a number, that's one of the things the actuaries do to me is, what is the increased OPEB expense for each additional head count?
right,
And the cost is basically the same. The only one where it's different is public safety individuals, because they can retire earlier. So there's a shorter period of time to fund their liability. So I actually have a number for both. This year, there is no public safety personnel requested increases, so there's no impact from them, but there is a number of what's called group one employees.
Let me ask a clarifying question. The presumption is that they retire as Needham employees when they hire, so day one, if they're 26, you
correct.
still have to accrue a liability based on 26. And if they retire from some other employment from Framingham, they're not on our books. but-
You're not on our OPEB.
That's correct. Now, in the actual assumption, there's not an assumption that everybody who is
Right.
employed with the town will take health insurance. So the actuary has already taken into account that it's generally
Breakage.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like life insurance. Some people make it to the end, some people don't.
Right, so that's factored into the actuarial analysis and.
So
since
I-
they had come-
So I'm just gonna say, I think it's highly overstated at this point. At $7.8 million.
Overstated, you're saying,
The actuarial analysis highly overstates the liability.
I just want to ask, are you suggesting that there be an adjustment in the actual analysis?
No,
Or
I
you,
think that when we do the next actuarial analysis, we're gonna need to look at what all the assumptions are in the
But
analysis.
my understanding is the actuary, based on the current analysis, it's like 34% funded.
Right, but I think that all of them are highly overstated. Every OPEB liability for every community is highly overstated. So I think.
Let's hope you're right.
that I
But even
think
if
we
it's
should look at it.
overstated at 34% funded,
It's understated at 34%, overstated in terms of what we're contributing, because if you look at our retirement assessment is only 11.4%
but
for the same basic. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time, but I just want to bring that up as a question that we
Okay.
should look at again.
But for the purpose of this evening, I think, do you agree, Louise, that the only reason that that line item might change is if we make any adjustments in the FTEs
Yes,
For now,
for now?
for now, yes.
At a later date, we can look at the actuarial.
right?
Yeah.
And by the way, we should be funding as much as we possibly can. Because it's a liability we're gonna have at some point. We just need to make sure that we're being reasonable with respect to the monies we're reserving. That's
Right.
all. I think that's what Louise is saying.
The only other difference, of course, is the retirement assessment is based upon is for the even contributory retirement system, to which none of the school teachers belong. But school teachers do belong to our health insurance. So that's why those numbers tend to be a little closer than one would think, because the state doesn't pick up any cost for health insurance.
Okay. So,
And we got through 4 lines.
yeah. exactly. And we'll come back to some of this stuff. Where were we? Retirement assessments,
Yeah, I think we've done
Same
workers'
thing.
comp too.
workers' comp, injury on duty. This is a new line item based upon.
And where were we
Public
paying that
safety.
out of the, no, it's not a new line item.
It is,
Yeah,
it
it
was
is.
not in there last year.
It's a new budget line. And we pulled it out of workers' comp.
Oh,
Yeah.
just separating it out.
Yes.
So I think, yeah, the difference between
Yeah.
line 7 and 8. Funds were moved from line 7 into line 8 for injury on duty. Classification, performance and settlements.
Which includes some of the,
Yes, we don't have settlement with fire for 2 years, police 1 year, DPW for 1 year, custodians and trades for 1 year.
and
And
superior.
there's, and non-represented there, and then an approval of
So
increase.
is that where you park the money?
Yes,
Okay.
And police superior as well, right?
and police superior.
In, Dave, which formula do you use to park the money? Because the negotiations aren't complete yet. So how do you know?
That's a executive session
yeah.
conversation.
Sorry.
Ah,
Okay,
nobody listen.
I just think I got my hand slapped. but I- Okay,
And you're an HR guy.
well,
Okay, reserve funds, number 10.
highly overstated. That's my usual
I like it.
position. I think we should reduce it by $225,000, 2 million even.
I'd leave it.
We, last year was level. I think between fiscal year 2020 and 2021, excuse me, 2021 and 2022, the funding of this was level.
We could level it again. We don't come close to expending the funds.
Also,
That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that, but I'd suggest that for the preliminary budget, we don't, and then when we swing back to finalize and square all the corners of the deck, we give it some serious thought.
I'd like to get beyond COVID. I think there's other things to follow, so, but again, I'm happy to discuss it later.
Yeah, let's come back to it, I guess. Okay. Select Board and Office of the Town Manager.
So can we go back to that budget later? Because I think we need to have a discussion about what is in the budget, what isn't in the budget for the town manager. Or do you want to,
I'm happy to come back to it also, but I had one thing I did want to raise. It's contingent on another line item though. There's going to be, we'll get to Council of Art and Culture later. If we're going to have that, last year, fiscal year 2021 was the first year when we included funds for community functions such as the blue tree lighting. And at the time, there was no other line item that really fit. If we're going to have the Council of Arts and Culture, I feel like that would fit better in that line item.
I agree with that.
So I guess we'll come back to that again after we have a discussion on arts and culture.
okay, so my question has to do with the fact that there were certain items that were not DSR fours, that are DSR fives, but that really are items for the budget. And so for the one with respect to the arts and culture, the $25,000, my question was, is this going to be on a fiscal year basis? For me, that really determines whether it goes in the budget or whether it's an outside warrant article. And I wasn't clear on that.
Well, did you put it in, Josh?
It is not in.
No, in Council for Arts and Culture.
The town manager asked if I would be amenable to considering it, and so I'm happy to consider it, but we haven't voted.
No, I got that, but in your little love sheet here.
Yeah.
Is that what that 8,000 is?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Oh,
That's the 25,000 divided by 3.
exactly. That's $25,000 by 3, but I think Louise is saying that
Bad
this
math. But
is approximately, Louise is saying, are the monies dispersed? Or
On a
expected
fiscal
to-
year, but are they expected to be dispersed on a fiscal year basis, is my question.
I have
So-
no idea.
Do you know, Dave?
If it's in the operating budget,
It will have-
it will have to be. To the warrant article, it's not a rigid, you got flexibility that if you need more in one year, you could do that, but to the operating methodology, it would, the expenses would be incurred in the year and would be paid in that year.
So my own opinion is, yes, it should be on a fiscal year basis, and then if there is some reason why, like if there is a special project, then that could be a financial warrant article. That's just my opinion.
So Needham Council for Arts and Culture also receives grants.
They do, and those are expended on a fiscal year basis. Those are received through the state, and they must be expended on a fiscal year.
But they're not in the budget, right?
They're not in the
Yeah.
budget
Yeah.
because they come through.
Right.
I'm questioning whether in May of 2022, we're gonna know what the requests for funding arts activities are gonna be for the next 12 months going out. I mean, it seems to me the type of thing that the flexibility of, it shouldn't be struck with a calendar year. If it turns out, I don't think we should have a special reserve article
Right.
if it's
They-
$9,000 we're giving here instead of 8, we have to, whereas I think the flexibility of something like this for a variable type of expense is appropriate for a warrant article rather than being locked into a fiscal year calendar.
So the only thing we don't want to end up with is what we ended up with planning board, where we had a financial warrant article and then it was all expended within a very short period of time when that was not what we had anticipated. We had anticipated funding to last a certain period.
Or the converse, where there is
They
an
don't spend
appropriation, and it's not
anything.
spent at all.
Right.
I guess my understanding is, my read is that the town manager was amenable to putting it in the operating budget and didn't seem to think that that was a concern for the operations of the Council of Arts and Culture.
Well, it should be there as long as we agree that it's an appropriate expense within the operating budget. And I guess what I'm saying is, if the argument is where it should be there. The question is whether it should be there at all.
Mhm.
So,
So on the merits, I think it has merits. I also think it should be in the operating budget.
so I would agree with the latter. I'm not sure about the former, but we're gonna get to that.
We are, you're right, yes.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We're still on select board and office of town manager.
Well, we're making progress.
Well, but the other issue had to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion program, which was for the
That, yeah. So that's,
creation of $100,000 to
Right.
have a program which was described as a training, basically, program. And the question was, why would that not be part of the operating budget? And then we can get more details about what the training is, but and what is the purpose of it?
Mhm.
We got a broad overview.
It just, I guess, I think it's important to keep these DSR fives in mind. If in case we think it fits better within the operating budget, I just don't want to start.
So DSR fives used to be, I mean, when people bring up the DSR fives, they were previously recommendations by the finance committee to have a DSR five. This is the reverse. And so what my concern is that we end up adding programs basically outside of the budget process, which is similar to when a grant is applied for. We have another funding mechanism or another vote determining what ends up in the operating budget. That's really what my question is. My underlying discomfort with the DSR fives being proposed by departments for something that ultimately is intended to be an operating budget expense.
No, I understand.
so for better or worse, I actually did the budget.
For
First,
that
probably.
department.
So they want community events. They want training and education for boards and committees. They want training for staff. They want to hire a third party to do the training. It may continue after 2 years. And there is the possibility of a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer down the road. Those are the notes I took from my meeting with the town manager. So despite what people have said that it's, kind of only a 2-year program. Yeah, I don't really agree with that. I think there is, if I look at the select board goals, I think there's a long-term commitment to this. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I make no comment right now, but, and that's why I have said all along, I thought it was a DSR 4. This should have been something that was identified that they wanted to be part of the operating budget moving forward. I guess the question I have, being the newcomer on the block, is if they haven't submitted a DSR 4, but they've submitted a DSR 5, what are we supposed to do? How do we, are we able to merge and move it from a DSR 5 into a DSR 4 for
Well,
consideration?
I mean, I think in fairness to the select board, I don't think they know what recurring expenses from a DEI initiative need to be in their operating budget. Unless, I don't think they know that. So how can you put that line item in the operating budget when some of it involves hiring an outside consultant and training boards? I'm kind of hopeful that they train HR professionals so they don't need to hire.
That's not gonna happen.
You might be right, Carol.
It's not.
And no, but I think Carol makes a good point. You can actually craft a DSR 5 to make it look like we don't know. And the problem I have with it is the whole problem I have with it, when I spoke about it the other day, is it's all a question of how you want to frame it. They clearly write, and I quote, which then can be evaluated and considered for extension or modification. They're not looking at this as a one-timer.
So I think,
Probably not, but I also think it gives us an opportunity to see how and observe how it is implemented, right? and whether we think it's a valid expense that should be ongoing down the road and then into the budget. Whereas you're not committing to it today to be embedded in the budget and then, go through the exercise each year where we say, this is in the budget, we want you to take this out of the budget at a later date. I think it makes, it's, we've done this a couple of times already, and I think it's, at least for the express purpose, not that they went in, we went into these things knowing it was likely to be, or they wanted it to be a permanent expense down the road, but at least we had the opportunity to observe it and come back to us with some results or some observations, however we want to, if there's any metrics that we want to look at to see if it's justified as an ongoing permanent part of the budget later down the road.
The discussion is very different when it's part of the budget as when it's a DSR 5. And I think, so first of all, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is here. It's going to stay. I don't think this is something that in 2 years is going to go away. And I think that to the extent that we want to have some ability to control what goes and doesn't go into the budget, our best chance of doing that is in the budget itself, not in DSR 5, which are financial warrant articles. The town meeting does not approach them the same way as they do the budget. They're not prioritized versus other things. They're standalone. But that's my own.
So Louise, are you proposing then that we would add $100,000 to the expense line item of select board?
I don't know whether 100,000 is right.
It's 2 years, so.
It's 2 years.
So are you, I think we're talking, if you want to do it, put it on the table and let's vote. I mean, I understand, I'm trying to get where we're going because I've been hearing the same, you said the same
Okay,
thing
so what
last
I
time.
think is that it should be considered as part of the budget,
Okay.
and we should determine whether or not we think this is something that should be included in the budget. I think that training itself is fine. There are a lot of things that were unappealing about what was being proposed, but training and diversity, equity, inclusion is fine.
The difficulty I have is that we haven't heard in detail, we did have a short discussion about it, we haven't heard the proponents
Right,
of this yet, so how could,
it's the town manager.
so I mean, would we want to invite
Get
her in
more
to discuss that? before we
information
take a
about
vote?
that particular, Jim was the liaison to
Oh,
the
boy.
department.
Yeah, it all comes back to me.
You volunteered that.
No.
So no, I think that, Josh, you make a good point. I still wrestle with, we're gonna argue the DSR 5 because it's in the warrant, and we're gonna get to this warrant at some point, and we're gonna go through them. I still believe that ultimately, this is not a one-time expense, and it's not even a two-time expense. It's not. It really isn't. So why don't they just come right up and say to us, we want to come up with some diversity and inclusion and equity, investments in the town. Whether we agree or not agree, we can have that discussion. We believe that that's an important aspect for the town of Mead. And in recognition of that, here's what we're going to do to make the whole budget work. And it may be that we take some positions and put them into different characterizations, or we take some duties and change them. But that's where I think the discussion should be. And I haven't been here. I'm the newcomer, and I know you guys came up with the DSR 5 as a wonderful idea to say, okay, well, let's talk about things that we don't want to stock into the operating budget and bulk it up. We want to make sure this is a good, worthy project. And only if it is, then maybe we'll put it into the operating budget. I think that was fantastic. And I know my old pal Dave was one of the ones who said, this is a good way to deal with it. I agree with you.
So.
But sometimes they take advantage of that and they say, now we're going to put it into a DSR 5, which does not compete. It does not compete. It really doesn't. And then what happens is 2 or 3 years later, well, you've already agreed to this for 2 or 3 years in a row, and obviously we need it. So now we're going to put it in the budget. And I don't see the intestinal fortitude to say, no, we're out of that. That was a good experiment for 2 or 3 years, but we're out of it. And I don't see that happening.
But I
Although-
think you're splitting hairs, because I think that you could put this in the budget and you're still not gonna take, it's not gonna be a quid pro quo. You're not gonna put 50,000 in and take 50,000 out.
We
Well,
might,
I don't know.
we might, but so I think, John, thank you, I didn't realize I was doing that. So I would suggest that it be placed, that half of it be placed in the operating budget and that we review it as part of the operating budget. So $50,000 be placed in the operating budget for diversity, equity and inclusion services, that we get a little bit more information about how that 50 will be spent next year. But that would be my suggestion. And I honestly don't think this is something that is going away.
I mean, I'm happy to have this discussion, but I would like to hear from the town manager. Our final budget isn't due until March
Right.
15th. So could we?
We can put
schedule-
it in there and schedule.
So you think it's better to put it into the budget? and
That's
take
what
it out
I
later?
would prefer. I mean, there are
I would like to be heard. a little bit.
other committee members.
Believe it or not, I agree with almost everything Jim has said.
No, write it down. I want that in the minutes.
Because you didn't get to the merits yet. I think the only reason for putting it in the DSR 5 versus the DSR 4 is that you have no reasonable estimate of how much it will be spent in this fiscal year. So I think if you don't, then I think it's highly arbitrary for us to say, let's cut the baby in half and put 50,000 in this year. That's just a total guess without substance. I would suggest that we invite Kate in or whomever and ask them why, are they capable of coming up with a reasonable estimate of what they'll spend this year? And if not, then I think it leads toward the DSR 5. If you can come close to a reasonable estimate of what it's going to spend, then I think putting in the budget makes sense, because I agree overwhelmingly, this is probably going to be some form of a longer term position.
No, I would agree with that. I don't think they know exactly how much it's gonna be. And I think it's a working group and a working thought, and they're pulling things together. So I'm all for talking to Kate again, saying, can you?
Yeah, I
Can
think
you
a
come
stern
close?
warning along the grounds of that Louise has brought up, though, is that, guys, if you blow through the whole 100,000 in year one, you're gonna have a problem with us.
So Louise made a motion.
To add, and I'm just putting 50,000 as a number. It could
Well, that is the number. It's 100,000 over 2 years.
divided, right, so 50,000,
That's
but
what the request was.
yeah,
But to Dick's point, we don't know if that's even.
We don't know.
But we don't know.
How
No,
do
they,
you know? How do you
no,
know?
they told me that.
Could they spend? could
That's
they
kind of
spend-
like, hi, what are you doing? Here's what I'm doing. I wrote it down.
Okay.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'm very comfortable moving it into the budget. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah,
but I think signaling that it would be in the budget rather than separate discussion outside of the budget is what I would like to.
the request is to be able to spend the funds over approximately 2 fiscal years.
That doesn't mean ratably.
Right, it could be
Well, I
80 the
said-
first year and 20 the second.
Okay, well, I said to both of them, both this and the other one, which was the cultural one, which was 25. I wrote down 25K over 3 years, $8,300 a year. This one, $100,000 over 2 years, $50,000 a year. I didn't make it up. I mean, that's what they told me,
So we're
but
voting,
I'm happy to get more information.
I guess my,
the motion on the table is to put it in the budget, or
Yes,
to have Kate come back here and talk some more, and
my motion is to
Louise
put it
moved
in
to
the
put
budget.
50,000 in the budget.
I second that motion.
Discussion. I think it's fine motion, but I feel like it's too early. I would prefer to consider the motion once we've spoken to Kate.
yeah,
I would agree, I would support
I'd like to
Josh on
speak to
that.
Kate too, to find out exactly what the thought is, because I agree, it's gonna be a long-term thing, but let's find out what's in their mind now, not to say that Jim didn't scrutinize, you know,
I
but.
know.
Yes, I know.
All right, listen, Chair, you want to have a little more time with the town manager. So I respect and I actually support the motions, but I'm going to agree with you. Let's have a little more discussion. We still have time to move that if and when we think it's appropriate to do so. But there is a motion on the table, so arguably we have to vote it.
Well, I can withdraw it if John is okay with withdrawing it right now.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, let's just do it, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So in the next couple of weeks, before the final budget, we'll speak to Kate and then we'll, probably take a vote on this.
Before the draft, I would
Yeah, the
like,
draft.
if we are inclined to do this, I would like it to be in the draft.
Okay, so then it would have to be next week. The draft is due the 22nd. Okay.
Fine.
Louise, you had other questions about the DSR fives?
Not for town manager, right?
There are three.
Parking study,
Parking studies.
they lowered it down to that.
But that's
135.
being paid out of the parking
Correct.
revolving fund. so It
Correct.
can't be in the operating budget.
Correct.
Well, that comes out.
Well, it's
That
in.
wasn't
It's
it.
in.
It was
It
never-
wasn't
It has a different funding source.
Different funding source, so it can't be part of it, but it would be a complicated. one.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's truly one time.
It's a DSR five, but it's got a separate
It's
funding
truly-
source, so
And
in
it's
other
really
words,
one.
we can deal with that
Mhm.
when we discuss DSR fives.
What did we decide on the arts and culture program?
We're gonna
We
get,
haven't gotten there yet.
although you got to the end, so if we want to get to the end, let's do it, Dick.
So, before we move on, any other discussion on select boards and office of town manager? Okay, office of the town clerk. There were no DSR4 requests. The increase was related to an increase in the number of elections. Legal services,
The only thing I would say, John, is I know you have a view on it, I have a view on it. I don't think it would be wrong, not even to do a procurement, but maybe just to say, kind of a request for proposals, where you could at least see what the services and the costs are. I know it's not part of this, and I'm happy to support this operating budget item. But I'd like to at least have that discussion, maybe in the summer or the fall.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not an endpoint on it, but
I get your point.
we can talk about it.
as a
I would
policy,
be alarmed if the legal budget was aggressively going higher and higher and higher. I don't see that. And I think we have bigger fish to fry, not using the right term, but I think that might be the right term for it. And I just wonder if we're poking our nose into a place that, again, there's bigger things that we should be poking our nose into, so.
Yeah, you might be right.
But it's not to say I'm right about it, this is what my thought is, but I'm happy to talk to it about it further.
finance departments.
Big problem here.
I am,
I think
even,
we should add 10 people.
I'm not gonna say that, I think one of the fascinating things about being on the finance committee is that when you present your department, my God, it's like your department. And everyone wants your department to get the dough. Well, so I'm gonna say, I want my department to get the dough. I thought Dave's two DSR4 requests were very, very reasonable. One is a low dollar one, it's just for an intern. And I think we have kind of an obligation to help our young people to get into this field and to prosper. I think that's kind of a pay it forward type of thing. And then the other one was basically to come up with someone who could have some synergy to step into the role, because right now we have one person that's doing two jobs, and if that one person, God forbid, wasn't able to come to work for a long while, we'd have a big time problem. So, but I think that one of the problems with this process is I don't have the same information that all of you have with all the DSR4s that you guys got. So I don't really have a great way of saying, is this DSR4 better than another DSR4? I don't have that ability. I think that what Dave presented was warranted and justified and should be supported, but I understand there could be other needs.
So I don't see any reason not to have an intern. I don't understand
No,
that decision.
it's
It's
short money.
$10,000 or whatever it is for,
The town manager only recommended one of the DSR4s.
Yeah.
right.
This
but
is the ones you didn't recommend, though.
The intern, so
Savings of
there's no reason
11.7.
not, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that seems like a,
Yeah.
I'm not compelled just for the record, I'm gonna say it now, because I want to say it 1,000 times. I'm not compelled by what the town manager wants,
Yes,
okay? And I can pull it out. I copied it, the bylaws, I've got it. I was part of writing it in 2004. I have every respect for the select board and the town manager make a proposal, but it's our budget to be presented to town meeting. Whatever we think is in the best use of our taxpayer dollars.
I agree with you, Jim. I think both DSR fours are worthy.
mhm, mhm.
Two.
So I think we should add that back in. Do I need to make a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that the finance committee include both DSR fours for the finance department in our draft budget.
Second,
And just to be clear, I think the difference would be an increase of $11,707.
Right.
Is that-
Yeah.
I don't know what you're looking at, so.
That's the information that was provided to us, 11,000.
It's this, it's the second one, this one.
Yeah, it would be an increase over what the town manager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? That would be, sorry. That would be 10,125 to the salaries line and 1,582 to the expenses line. Any other discussion?
There's a marginal note on what you said out 1,500 one time. What's that?
That way I would have pulled that off the DSRs for itself.
That was the computer, maybe?
The student interns on 373.
It's the 1,500 is, it's actually the purchasing of a laptop. That's the cost, 1,500. The $82 is the annual subscription, Microsoft.
Okay,
So the 1,500 is not, would be in the budget?
This year, if it's recommended, it would be $1,582, an increase in expenses. But the following year, only $82 of that $1,582 is recurring.
Thank you.
And of course, that would be, if it was appropriated, I would be disclosing that it went down $1,500 because of the one-time expense.
All right, thank you. Okay, there's no discussion. We can take a vote on the motion to increase salaries and wages by 10,125 and expenses by 1,582. Carol?
Yes.
John?
yes,
Dick?
yes,
Jim?
Yes,
Rick?
Yes.
Louise?
Yes,
Barry?
Yes, and I would just advocate as well for, I'm a big believer in using interns. You know, wherever possible. I think, you know, we have lots of issues in finding, you know, a lot of these departments and finding qualified people. I just think in getting people to be excited about municipal employment. So I'm a huge advocate for interns wherever it makes sense, and certainly in this case as well.
Thanks, Barry. I agree. And the chair votes yes. The next is Finance Committee. No discussion.
underpaid, just for the record.
Planning and Community Development. There was one DSR for request, I believe.
mhm.
And that was for a zoning specialist additional hours.
5 additional hours.
Mhm.
I would make a motion to accept that. Is that what you need in the motion?
I guess
It's in the budget.
Oh, it's already in. Okay.
we're kind of going off of what.
Oh, that was
Been
already
proposed by the
the
town
recommendation. Got it.
Yeah.
As opposed to our budget, yeah.
I know.
That's a tweak.
You have a point?
Got it. Got it. All right.
Okay, further discussion.
I'm an old guy.
Police
Older than
Department. Discussion about the police department budget.
Oh, boy. Could be the
There's one DSR for request to move the law enforcement clinical support position, which had been funded through a DSR 5 into the budget.
So I still think that's a low number, but that's what they requested, so.
So
Yeah, it's just my
Okay.
comment is,
Go ahead, Rick.
They may, to your point, Louise, they may discover
Yeah.
that they're going to need that individual more than they think they do when they share it
Yeah.
with them. And so if they come back next year and say, we've learned for a year,
Mhm.
after going at this a couple of years in terms of really studying it, that I would certainly be amenable to playing with that number in the 24 budget.
and if they find themselves partway through the year and then, having exhausted all their hours, we do have a
Reserve fund.
reserve fund.
Um,
And I think it'd be good to give them that message.
I think in our discussions with the chief, I think, so this position is half times with
Yes.
Adams and only available during day hours.
Mhm.
So I think between December 2020, when they were hired, and I think July, when they had data available, there were between 0 and 2 live calls per month that this person attended. So the structure may make it difficult
Yeah.
to attend calls.
We spoke that we thought that also this individual really should be an employee as opposed to lend lease kind of thing, if I can frame that. But the reason why he was so firm is that this individual, given their relationship as an employee with Riverside, they have access to a host of information that a town employee would not. And so the benefit of that is that we rent, so to speak, but maybe someday, maybe rent to own if they can figure out how to do all of that. But right now, we have the advantage of all that information that we would otherwise have. And so the person could be far more effective. So
Next item is fire department. There's one DSR4 request for a new fire record software for $20,000. And the increase in FTEs is a result of the previous grant funding, which is rolling off. So it's an effective increase of 2 FTEs, which we're paying for out of the budget rather than through grant funding. Any discussion?
Reasonable to me.
We understand at the time that the grant funding was there, that.
We did.
We did.
Very
We understand
clear.
it was rolling off.
Because I wasn't there. at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
It was that they needed the people, but they were being brought on.
So we got basically some years paid
Yeah.
on our behalf.
3. A certain percentage of the past 3 years has gone
We don't have
towards
to pay it back,
towards the
right?
salary. No, do not. But now we inherit all of those. But they've gotten some great efficiencies in terms of the bodies that they fired, in terms of the second ambulance, lower response time, and it's done. I think it's done stuff to their service delivery. Because most of their runs now are basically life support as opposed to structure, and that second ambulance just up where it is in Station 2 does a world of good to the town.
Perfect.
Next department is the building department. Dick, did you have-
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. We're still working with Dave Roach on the allocation of the time relative to function.
Yeah, you've done yeoman's work, but when we had our conversation, and he referenced the 35 essential functions, I would have loved him to pull that from job descriptions and standing on something finance, solid ground.
That's what we're gonna be presenting.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
The Minuteman Assessment.
Just an observation on that from last week.
Okay.
And again, I was just listening. I want to make sure we're consistent, and it came through that from Dave, that this was a lot of extra work for him in putting this together, and not that it's not beneficial, but I think we need to be consistent in years going forward, that we need to make other departments do the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I've had this feeling like he felt he was getting picked on. And I know we weren't, but it's where we started, and I think it's important to be consistent and carry this
I
through, so
totally
that
agree.
others so he can look at it next year and the year after, or his successor, if there is one, and say that, so they just weren't singled out at the expense of everybody else. So
No.
that was just my observation from listening to him last week. I think going
There
forward.
a little justification and a little whining
Yeah.
Yeah,
in what he was saying.
yeah.
But it was particularly upset because he felt he was the only department was being put through this.
Right.
You know, he made that clear.
Well,
So,
we did it though with community development.
Kind of, but it's more amenable to, it's,
Yeah, well,
building
that was the
department is more
problem, he felt that-
transactional, so.
Community development, he was particularly pissed the fact that she said how great it was working from home. And he said, yeah, but everybody comes into their office, doesn't find anyone, they come down the hall and talk to us. So we're making up, so he was,
Yeah.
he had, there's a little
I can see
friction
that.
between the two of them.
Yeah.
definitely see that.
Although it
Hate
certainly
to
was,
see that.
although it certainly was, he had his little mouthful of castor oil. But I think from a manager's perspective, I think what he's gonna walk away with, what he's learned from the kinds of stuff you put him through as a manager, I think makes great sense. In terms of cross-training, I just think he has a greater sense of his department after this. So even though it was plug your nose and take your castor oil, I think he's gonna walk away much better for it.
Oh, I think he acknowledged that, actually. He did acknowledge that. I think it's, and if for no other reason, it's probably worthwhile to do this with other, with other departments, not just because, so he feels a little better about having gone through it, but, I think he took things away from it that he didn't expect.
Right. I think what Dick found was, since most of it was labor,
Yeah,
but in other departments, I'm sure we're going to see, there's things that have gone on year over year over year, that when you look at it in the way that we're gonna put it to them, is that really gonna work well? It kind of fell to the cost of labor and all that. And so in essence, it was a little bit different, but I think it's got great value down the road.
I want to make sure the value is part of the budget, like it has budgetary implications.
It should. If we guide it correctly, it should.
Next one is Minuteman Assessment. We circulated an updated preliminary assessment from Minuteman District, and it's lower actually than what's currently in the budget. It's $1,367,739. Did we want to make a motion to change that?
We have to,
To
right?
reflect it? Yeah.
So I move that we change the line item under 20, assessment total, from 1483173 to 1367739.
Second.
Okay, further discussion?
I appreciate the information from John and from Louise Misgard on my questions. Part of my hangover is that I knew things a long time ago, which may not be accurate today. So I appreciate the new information. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a vote. Barry,
Yes, sorry.
Louise,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Dick,
yes,
Jim,
Yes,
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes,
and the chair votes yes. Next item is Needham Public Schools. There are, what number? 25.82 FTEs being requested in the budget. John, Carol, and I had several conversations with the liaisons about these new positions. And I think some of the confusion maybe is that they're characterized as related to COVID-19 and having been funded on a temporary basis from grants last year. But it's not clear if these are intended to be temporary on an ongoing, or it's unclear whether they're meant to be permanent on an ongoing basis.
Question, current vacancies in FTEs in the school department right now is how many?
As of January 10th, there were 32.36 vacancies.
So 32. And so in essence, in your conversations with them, did they tell you how they were making how are they delivering their service shy of all those bodies?
Not as well as they would like to, but they are. I mean, it's,
Taking from Peter, giving to Paul, and taking part-time people and all that, and taking all the ancillary stuff.
or maybe having 4 students for the teacher as opposed to 2
Right,
students.
or a higher caseload for counselors than optimal.
Okay.
But I don't think we can be critical. I mean, that's,
No.
everybody's facing that issue. So,
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
and that doesn't mean they shouldn't look to staff to the level they think they need to staff to and get the budgetary authorization to do so, and it's likely to be a big turnback.
And the, so they're working their butts off to
We'll see.
deliver the job. with
Well.
All those
potentially,
FTEs
yeah,
out,
but next
And now
year,
they have this in the budget,
Special ed.
and if they don't fill that, will that just be turned back, or what? Because they're having a heck of a time, I'm sure, filling those spots like everyone is. So what happens to the budget money that's there?
Called a spend down.
It should be turned back.
It should be turned back. There's a combination of they find uses for it.
Or they prepay
Special ed.
special ed. I mean, that's what happens. They
Okay.
use a lot of that to prepay special ed.
Be out of district primarily, isn't it?
Mhm. But we can ask for more of it.
In the old days, they did a lot of other things. It wasn't just special ed. I mean, we can ask for what the list would be, but there were a lot of pre-purchasing of books, a lot of computers,
But they
it's,
have pretty good budgets these days.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just calculated out the school committee went from 45% of the overall budget in fiscal year 18 to 63% in fiscal year 23.
so we used to be a town with a great school system, so now we're a school system with a bit of a town.
It has basically.
I mean, it's definitely worthy of discussion and or concern and sustainability. To keep raising the numbers of FTEs within the department, particularly with students being flat, with enrollment being flat, notwithstanding how they might want to characterize it otherwise. It's
Are
flat.
there more programs, John? Are there
Yeah,
more
well,
classrooms or?
There are more, definitely more, and it's mostly all entirely in special education.
Mhm.
And there's a constant push of delivering different and other services that require just not buying something, but people to effectuate it. And
But there's
that-
also kind of a topping up, if you will, of, getting, improving their student-teacher ratio vis-a-vis their competitors. But part of the issue is some of their, comparative schools, their student population is dropping.
Mhm.
So they look favorable. They look lower than us because it's lumpy.
Mhm.
So I'm not just sure, I'm just not sure that's the right barometer to always be looking at.
I think one of the big problems here is, I'm very sympathetic that they probably don't know yet what the impact of COVID is on, particularly on the special ed students. And so I'm sympathetic to the need to try to address that. The problem is, there's likely to be a very ratchet effect. It's going to be very hard to dial that back, because it's to be clear that it has been beneficial to do that. It's going to be hard to say, well, you really don't need that much anymore, dial it back. So there is, I think if there were some way to put these in on a temporary basis to go in, it's clear that at least it's a hurdle that needs to be addressed, rather than just assume it's part of the quote level service element for next year.
Do I hear a DSR 5?
Well, I don't know, or just as
We asked
maybe,
that.
the
We asked
categorization of.
that. And we asked that question, and they were very firm about why they didn't think that was practical or feasible, and for the reasons why we'd be suspicious of, right? Because it takes the control away and whatnot. But
Is it
I,
40? How many is it, 40?
No, there were a total of 20.
26, almost 20,
Around-
26.
26,
And I think the way I look at it is, you do 26 plus 32 unfulfilled positions, you basically, in a sense, have over 50 positions that realistically you're not going to be able to fill, and you really need them all. And if you just keep adding without taking a look at what you're unable to fill, you're just always going to add. And to Dick's point is, when do you ask the question of when's the right time to stop adding or adding less? And you know, when you look at it, you say last year they went up by 16, sort of in the same structure of COVID, and now they're going up 16 plus another 10. Still sort of in the same genre of what we're experiencing. And there's all justifications for it. And there are always going to be justifications for it. But when is the time where you just say, you know, enough's enough, or we think in light of the other concerns within the overall budget that and not another 10 is appropriate. We certainly can see another 16 to match what you did before, but it's the exponential part is going to make Louise's part of the percentage of the budget is going to keep going up and up and up.
Right. I keep going over this in my head. If their customer base, their student population is flat, and to use their language, level service. If they're going to give a level service to a flat customer base, why are they increasing teachers? And certainly not being in the trenches there all day long, I just offer that almost as a Monday morning quarterback, but just the incongruency of all that kind of just makes me wonder. Now, if their customer base was increasing, they had to chase it to maintain level service, I'd say, sure, but you know,
I don't think level service, although that's a term they use and they back their way into it. Look at it simply like this, that they're pretty consistent that the special education component or the number of students receiving it is, I'm just gonna use it 18%. And it's been pretty consistent all these years. That's about 18%, but yet what they're devoting to that 18% as far as programs and teachers and other types of things is much greater, even though that 18% has remained constant.
Actually, I think the percentage has gone up, hasn't it, significantly?
It's been pretty, at least my recollection and the time I've done it, it's been in that 16, 17, 18%. But it wasn't like it went from 12 to 20. It's the component has been pretty within the same ballpark.
And these are mandated at the end of the day as well.
I don't think anyone's saying they aren't or shouldn't be done, but there comes a point where how many extra things do you do? Right, and that's what I'm pointing out.
And having the luxury of being able to look under the covers for the past 12 years in special ed, because my wife is retired as a special ed teacher, it just behooves me to have my perspective even more. Like they can increase all kinds of things, but well, enough said.
So can is there a mechanism, I don't think we have one right now in town, to set aside money for school buildings for capital projects?
Yeah, there's a capital facility.
So to the extent that there is turn back from the school department that we know, I would suggest that be placed directly into a stabilization fund, and then used to at least reduce some of the capital that's coming up. I'm trying to find like ways, I mean, if we're gonna increase the school budget, which is tough to argue against, but we know that there's going to be turned back this year. They'll probably be turned back next year. Can we at least recoup some of the turn back and then use it for some other school purpose that is something that's a stated school purpose and may help us, you know, defray some of the costs that we know are coming down the pipe.
But the thing with the turn back, especially in an age of increasing inflation, is that your dollars next year are going to be worth less than your dollars this year. combine
Yeah,
it.
but we're gonna get the turn back either way. So either we set it aside for capital, or it just goes into free cash, that giant,
Or it goes
from
into other expenses they just pay.
right.
Mhm.
Because the
Like-
spend
like-
down exists.
It does exist, but if we were to say instead, let's think about it differently. If you've got, 30, whatever the
Yeah.
number of positions.
Not to be cynical, but I would just as soon get that money. And if it goes to free cash, at least the town gets the money. If
No,
they say it
they'll
is to
just-
go to this fund, that there won't be any turn back. It'll be used to.
Well, you do have to
maintain
be
the machine.
careful, because we're counting on so much free cash as part of the budget, right, Dave?
Yes.
But we don't assume that the schools will give us a penny.
Really?
Really?
How dare you do that?
We assume zero from the schools.
Okay.
I mean,
But it's complex, because you're basically looking at three different formulas. One formula is it goes to free cash, one formula goes to a spend down, one formula now would go to a building fund. I'm not against any of it, but I don't know how you
I'm
manage
just trying
it.
to find money, a purpose for the money other than to spend down.
Oh, good, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if it does go to a building fund, it still requires a town meeting action
Yeah,
to do that. It doesn't
right,
happen
it does.
automatically.
But the idea, we need some amount of free cash. We don't want to ever under budget. But in the extreme, if we have so much over budgeting that there's so much turn back, that I feel like that's very inefficient use of our dollars.
Yeah.
It is, but your two choices are what?
That's what she's been
Reduce-
saying for 2 years.
Reduce taxes, or if you're not gonna reduce taxes and we're gonna have it in a budget, then use it to reduce excluded tax. So at least that,
I think that reducing taxes is a good idea. And
it's another way. to
Over the
re- I'm
course-
just trying to put
no, but
another way to
over the
reduce.
course of the year, if we find that we need to reallocate money, we can do that, at special town meeting. We can always budget more, make an
And actually,
amendment
the
to the
Board of
budget.
Selectmen can do that at the end of the year, if there are some line items that are off.
I don't, can you they can do that?
Under the governor's, in the change in the law.
But, I
In
mean,
conjunction with finance.
could we approve some of the requested monies now and then? Well, I guess it's hard for like the schools where they have to hire at the beginning of the year. You're
Right,
not
they
gonna
need
wanna
to know
hire
in
someone at the beginning of
September
the year.
what was authorized.
Yeah.
Or they need to know in August what was authorized for the school.
Mhm.
Is it too draconian to take the funds that we would allocate for these 25 FTEs and put that money in the reserve fund? So when that person
We've
gets
had that
hired,
discussion with them.
I think that's a terrible
is that,
idea.
They don't want,
is
to-
that naive? Or is that,
they don't want to come to the finance committee. to ask for money.
yes, I.
Well, no, that's just my opinion. I know other people agree with you.
Okay,
I think the thing that I find very troubling, and I bothered both Josh and Louise with this earlier today. I find it very difficult to evaluate the reasonableness of the request for the additional personnel. I mean, they make you say, I don't have the expertise, and I don't think the presentation that I heard and I try to research gives me information that makes me comfortable making a decision one way or another. So at this point, I'm saying, how do I second guess them? Oftentimes I do feel I know enough to say I don't like that idea, or I do like the idea. Here, I think I'm almost going on faith that they're making a good faith effort to try to identify the need, and
How many openings did they have the year before, John?
Open, it'd be,
Well, like they have, you said
Unfilled.
32.
2.
Yeah, so how about last year?
I think it fluctuates over time, but I know there was always an amount. We'd have to research it.
I mean, I'm just curious, if they have a history of having so many positions open, I mean, perhaps maybe we should realize that those they're either not gonna get filled, or if they're gonna get filled, you don't need the extra ones.
so in effect saying, we'll authorize 95% of your requested FTEs, and you figure out where they go.
Right. Well, no, I
Well,
mean, it
that's
seems
the problem.
silly, if every single year they've had so many different positions open, unfilled, and yet we're still throwing more positions at them. That doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
I don't.
So
So,
I wasn't being facetious with it because they weren't clear. That's what bosses did to me. They said,
You get it.
take 4% out of your budget, you figure out where it comes from.
Well, also look at it, I mean, if anyone listens last night to the Zoom call, one of the big statements is that there's not enough room for all the programs, and that's why we need to build these schools. Well, if there's not enough room, where are you putting these people where are you putting these 25 people, 26 people next year if you don't have room? And then,
Well, it's 50,
50, right.
it's
Yeah.
50,
plus the 32, right?
right.
yeah, exactly. So and those there aren't unoccupied classrooms. So you just, like at a point in time, where's the timeout and come and say, wait a second here, this
Yeah.
doesn't all add up. Whether you look at it at your level or you whether look at, of 52 positions, or if you look at it, you don't have enough room, but yet you're still hiring, which is it? And where do you say this is where we stop? It's hard. It's really hard.
So Dick, to your point, I guess the 32 positions amount to approximately 4% of the FTEs that they're budgeted.
So just take 5% off of their request.
No,
And-
I don't think that I would
Right.
suggest doing that. I think we should have another discussion
Mhm.
with them about that. You've
Yeah.
got 32, you're asking for 25, that's a delta of 57, which actually now becomes closer to 7.5%. And,
Well, if you assume they're not all going to be filled.
right, so now what?
And get that, and I think we need that information.
Yeah, and then I want to know what they're gonna do with the turn back, but those 32 FTEs, unused salaries.
Maybe we can ask the superintendent to come in next week.
Yeah.
Prepaid special ed. or-
But that's a lot of special ed. to
Okay. So yeah, so let's discuss this more with the superintendent next week, hopefully be available.
You have a
Um,
long list, your list is getting longer, John.
A little bit.
I'm not coming. Too long a list.
Building design and construction department.
We certainly want to be busy for the next 40 years.
We finally got them to come down, and I'm sure. we'll be
Exactly.
seeing
It's
that
gonna
go
be
back.
like a year.
Yeah, a year of it, right?
Um,
Did I understand them correctly? They would be looking to add personnel when things like Emory Grover and school stuff kind of comes on board.
They might, they have, they've hired sort of an outside firm that can provide services at, on call, so to speak. For project management services, and I think it's wise to have that for a while to see what the workload, if it's gonna be. I still think they have enough people there with the 3.5.
Okay, Department of Public Works.
We have a few DSR fours here.
Yes,
Just a couple.
not all of which were recommended by the town
Right.
manager. Yes, sir.
Well, I think what the town manager has, it's got the weekend cleaning. There is, add one more laborer so they can have 2 full staffs. The survey party chief, which is inaptly named, is not conducting
It
the
was
survey.
renamed to civil engineer.
Yeah. And then the HVAC supervisor, I think that's, we've given all them effort and cost of the HVAC thing, I think that makes a lot of sense. The others, I don't see any reason to disagree with the town manager's denial of
So
coverage.
the two things that I would say is, one, with respect to the civil engineer, it's very similar to the building design and construction. Because that's someone who will do or does do construction supervision. And so I'm not sure how we budget building design. We budget 100% of the salary and then we charge it back to projects.
Yes, hours that are directly related to the project.
So I think we want to make sure that that occurs for Public Works as well, because that was one of the explanations that was
Yeah.
provided to us. I'm not sure that they are doing that.
Many of the projects that they're talking about are like Eversource and
Those are some, but they are also supervising our own
Yeah.
capital projects.
right, although we generally don't, but we don't build in the cost into our request
Yeah.
for public
Road
work
work?
projects. For road, yeah, we don't build in time
Okay,
for our
so-
people.
Okay,
That was my question. Does it make any difference
yeah,
whether we, for bookkeeping purposes, with a capital versus it's still being expended, right?
Correct, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is it's not.
well,
Just
no, I
yet.
mean, they're hiring someone else to do it right now. So
the-
instead of having an outside engineering firm doing some of the work, we would be able to do it. And then we can do some of these other things, the private things. So anyway, that's just a question for you. And then the other thing with the HVAC, I thought that what it was is we could not fill the positions that we actually have. And so they wanted to hire an HVAC supervisor, but that was in lieu of something that we had.
No, this is, a combination is, yes, we're having difficulty hiring people and eventually we're gonna be able to hire people. The second thing is the amount of work, having someone who not only is doing work, but can also supervise. And supervise doesn't mean in the sense that they're watching over the other employees, but looking over their work plan and their recommendations for repairs, and do those actually make sense to do, as well as give a little more critique to the to the companies that we hire when they make a recommendation, well, we think we should be doing this work to your rooftop unit, having this person give it through. Does that make sense? Or are they adding improvements that may not necessarily make sense?
So I may be misrecollecting, but my understanding was that we have some vacancies in facilities for these particular positions at a particular level. We're not able to fill them.
Correct.
And so we were trying to get to a higher level position, hence the $101,000 or $102,000 salary. And so my question is this additional or in lieu of one of the positions that we're not able to fill?
No, this is the increasing the headcount, so we basically have someone of that would be overlooking
Yeah.
the work
Vacancies
plans.
that we have
on
and the
those
contract.
4 people, but also be
Yeah.
doing HVAC work as well. It's an HVAC technician person, but also a supervisory in the sense they're looking at the work plan and the suggestions of the repairs that our technology people say our HVAC people need to be doing, as well as when the HVAC technician from Acme Corp says, oh, well, you need this translucent, making up the term, to your unit, and having that person look at it, does that seem sensible? Whereas the individuals that we have as the technology are doing troubleshooting, but they are not the people that are actually looking at the third-party contractors and looking at their recommendations. They're just doing their work plan. They got a call, we don't have any heat here at Broad Meadow. Why? They're coming in, they're doing the troubleshooting. And if it seems that the project's too big, they're calling administration and saying, okay, you need to bring a contractor in. This is beyond what I can. This individual would be doing that as well, plus looking at when the contractor makes the recommendation for these repairs, is that sensitive? Because the work volume And there's also looking at what the recommendation of the work to be done. So there's two parts that need to be considered. In this position would be focusing not only work, but also what the recommendations for the repair.
That was my sense too. I think we need someone who is more than a technician here, a worker. And I think, given the amount of resources that HVAC is gobbling up, which is utilizing, I think we need to have someone with the judgment who can look at it and manage the process a
Well,
little
and kind
bit
of
rather than just.
triage it too.
Exactly.
Right, I mean,
I
right
guess-
now it's the maintenance, I understand that, I forgot, it's Barry, right, who's doing the work, and so they want to free him up to do
Yeah,
other things.
yeah.
And bring this other person in.
It's actually a pretty good write-up in the book at 3-.
Yeah, I
187.
read it, but I thought that one of the things that we were talking about was that they were not able to hire the HVAC technicians, I'll just follow up.
Yeah, maybe, I mean,
Yes.
that's, yeah, I'm sure these positions are in extreme high demand. Is every town presumably going through the same thing? And the company,
No, it's just, it's an issue is that not enough people are actually going into the work now. And that was one of the things that Karis was saying, is trying to partner with the trade schools to show students that there are jobs out there if you go into it, and to actually hire them on their intern programs, and hopefully they'll come and work for the town meeting when they graduate.
Minuteman.
Yes, that's exactly, she's reached Minuteman clearly, because they're the school that we send students to, as well as other towns, but also Chief Tech and I'm drawing a blank on the other one that's nearby.
Keith.
I said Chief Tech in Framingham, and then there's another trade school that's nearby to encourage them, because in theory is students going there also live in this area, and they may be more inclined to, when they graduate, to perhaps work,
Makes sense.
continue working with me.
But to Louise's point, if we're having trouble hiring for the lower level position, would it be worth funding?
Yeah, I'm just gonna follow up,
Okay,
Paris, yeah.
okay.
Well, it's a two-step process relative to the lower position. It's also, we gotta negotiate, it's a unionized position, so we have to negotiate the change in compensation.
Right.
The issue is the top of our scale
Mhm,
is not attracting people.
mhm.
And hopefully through education, we can explain the benefit of a pension and health insurance, because they're just looking at dollars. But once the economy slows down, you know, that HVAC company will say, bye.
Other comments about the Department of Public Works? Okay. Municipal parking program. Health and Human Services Department. I guess related to some questions earlier about grant funding. I think Health and Human Services is a beneficiary of some of the ARPA funds. So in future years, I don't know whether we should expect potentially some of those funds to move into the budget. I don't know.
But that was also funding very specialists like nurses for testing, right? Some of those funding, so it may not, we may not need those positions.
I guess we don't know.
There are many things that they've undertaken that they don't anticipate will continue forever, and hence, once the issue goes away and the funding goes away, those positions would go away. There are others, and I think particularly in the area of nursing, that I think, I know at least one nurse there who will probably advocate to retain when the grant funding runs out. We have grant funding for a couple of years for the position. But they do not anticipate, like the contract tracers. In fact, one of them is leaving now because we're slowly weeding off of that.
Yeah,
And-
contract tracing isn't even being done now.
Yeah, it's not being done anymore.
For the schools, it still has to be, but that goes away soon. But the point is, they're not going to keep the person.
Right.
Yeah, the job's not going away. It's not
Yep.
something they're looking to bring into the budget.
Okay. That's helpful to know.
Question. In the Dave, if I may, in the past, before they put the three departments together, the old director used to get an ungodly amount of in-kind and grants to run youth services. And now it's all combined. And so it's difficult to see is that particular niche in those three combined budgets, are they getting as many grants and in-kind services as, there's no way to tell that now since it's combined, but your sense?
Oh, my sense is that Sarah Shine is still getting in-kind services stuff. In fact, she's working with the Exchange Club on one very program that's in-kind friendly. But yes, still gets in-kind services and donations and funds, which relies upon providing services to youth and families.
Gotcha. And I'm sure that's documented in terms of how much money in terms of grants actually comes into that particular area.
Oh, in terms of grants, well, all grants.
Yeah.
That's one of our costs in the finances. We have to
But
track
there was a
each
lot
grant
of
separately.
volunteer
Yeah,
time too.
yeah.
Well, in
Lots of
terms of
in-kind
that, I would
services.
presume that she is
Maintaining that, or?
maintaining that. I certainly can follow up with her, or if you wish to reach out.
I'd be curious. Yeah, I can do the same thing. Yeah.
It
I
would
can
be
do
in the
that.
town report submission as well.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Commission on Disabilities. Next, Historical Commission. I actually reached out to Dave about this and a couple other departments. The salary line items have been blank for these, on this for several years. And Dave said it would be fine if we wanted to collapse this into just an expense line item.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
Okay. So then I would suggest that we just have line 27, no letter expenses.
I won't feel the same way about the Memorial Park trustees.
Well, I will suggest it.
Oh, my God. That's a sea change.
Public library.
So I agree that overdrive subscription is part of what they provide. In terms of additional staffing, I don't know, how did everyone else feel about?
Seems like a lot of change.
Right.
770, 1.2 to 1.4 over 3 years.
So I think overdrive.
They're gonna be up with the
is-
schools pretty soon.
Overdrive is like $15,000. Adding the admin help is a half-time position, which I do think that Anne did a lot of that admin work herself, which probably does belong with an admin person doing the work. And that's how they got away with having a half-time administrative person. I think everything else, they still get the state grant account. They're still, they encumber the funds, but they still have quite a bit of money left. So I think if that's what I think it's adding a 0.5 to their budget to bring the part-time administrator to a full-time administrator.
In this budget write-up, I see it's an increase of 1.0
It's not, no, there's only an increase of 0.5.
from 15 to
It's
17.
just the 19.5 hours. We don't consider that as an FTE account, just like all the part-timers that they use. We don't have that as an FTE account. The FTE account is only for benefited positions.
Got it. Thank you.
So that's why it looks like one, but
So we're really
no, it's
only
one.
adding 0.5 to the total
0.55.
count
Correct.
of the library.
So, Louise, help me out on this.
Mhm.
So I'm sure I'm not seeing everything, but from FY 21 to 22, the budget went up. How much? From 1.8 to 2 million, so that's $200,000, which is a 10% increase,
Closer to 12, right?
12%. And now it's going from,
Another 10,
yeah, I mean,
How is
that,
it going up another 10? It's going up from,
2,055,000 to 2,273. It's a
it's not
200,000.
2273.
huh?
It's not 2273, it's 21.
That's the request. That's
That's
not
if
what,
if
That's their
everything was
request.
funded.
So what's the number that you're looking at?
2116, 2115. It's an addition of about $45,000.
Okay. Well, so then you need a motion, right?
Yeah, it's a 5%.
Sorry, what's the suggested change?
Well,
Well, it's in,
What-
this is the correct number. The number that's on this sheet.
I think it's.
this
Well,
sheet
it-
is a department request.
Yeah,
I
but this
think
is the
that's
town
correct.
manager request.
Town manager's request is 2,116,799.
Right.
And that seems reasonable. which
I
is-
think that that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, it's roughly a 5% increase year over year.
so we don't need to make any motion.
I don't think so.
No,
Okey dokey.
I mean, we can if we want.
Got it. Don't want to do anything we don't have to do, Josh.
So yeah, I was really happy with the presentation that the library
Yeah.
made.
Yeah.
I'm happy with these two increases. Okay. Next department is Park and Recreation. Any discussion about that?
So one DSR4 was to have a roving monitor. And what was the other one? Or is it two of them?
Well, it was
They
step
wanted
two,
two
but the
positions.
town manager recommended only one. Roving monitor.
I would be inclined to at least try the roving monitor. The only question the only question I have is whether we add it to the budget or whether, we have a trial period. I don't know if it's gonna work. But, so I hate to suggest this. But I just don't know if we want to add it to the budget or if we want to look at it another way. I want to try it. Something has to be done. There isn't enough monitoring that's going on at the fields. It's been going on, I was with the trustees since, I think, 2014, so.
They seem to think they've tried just about everything, and this is their last.
It's kind of like the next best. They've tried to get the principal involved at the high school. They've tried to use the big bellies. They've tried to use the solar things.
I'm not convinced that this is the right department for the position to be in. I think it should be DPW. Because I think they have much better access to things you really need for this, such as like on how to operate a truck and how to get someone with a a trash disposal, a claw, or all those types of different things. I think this person's gonna be on a phone saying, I need someone to come over here and do something. And so I think this, I'm in agreement with trying the position. I just don't think it's in the right department. In answering, calling up the park and rec head and saying, well, I'm at Memorial Field and there's trash here, and how are we gonna get someone here to get it? Just seems like you're putting a cog in the wheel that you'd be much better off if you had someone who had the boots on already to be able to effectuate it.
Good point. So what do we do there, John?
Move the ranger to DPW,
That's what I would propose.
so fund it.
And quite honestly, I think that person, like, I was, I know I had this conversation when we had the person, like, what would that person do today, right?
Mhm.
On February 9th, and what kind of, if they're within, and I think in DPW, you could find out the things that you could have he or she do.
They actually said now is as busy. Even though we thought this was, no one was, remember, well, at least that's what they said, that it's actually busier now
Mhm.
than it would be when you think it is in the summer. I got that.
Yeah. That made a lot of sense to you too, right?
Oh, no, I got it.
So
I'm good at
my
that.
recommendation would
I
be.
can't
that-
read faces as well because of the
I
mask,
know.
but I can do that.
My recommendation is that we move it into DPW.
Under the division of Parks and Forestry
Yes.
in that division.
Under Eddie Olson,
Under-
Oh,
said-
I would agree with that.
I second that.
Makes sense to me.
So do you need a motion to that effect, Josh?
Yeah, so I think we have a motion, so the amount would be. I don't have a split between salaries and expenses, actually. I have the total of $69,404.
Probably good enough for right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
I could figure that out.
2,175 is the expenses,
Oh, thank you.
2175.
2,175.
So I would second the motion.
Okay, so. um, So that would be increasing. No, sorry,
Yes. It's a motion to increase the DPW budget.
and correspondingly, decrease the park and rec. Salary and wages by $67,229 and to increase the DPW expenses and decrease Memorial Park expenses by $21.75.
In parking lot.
Yes. Yeah, and to increase DPW and correspondingly decrease park and rec.
That's my motion.
Okay.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call. Carol,
Yes,
John,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes,
and the chair votes yes. There was a second ESR for request, and that was for a summer program counselor / director.
Now, isn't that the one that they couldn't lose on? And it was all.
It was revenue generating.
Yeah,
It's revenue generating, so we'll get more revenue for it by adding this.
so why, and that was not recommended by the town? manager?
No, it was.
It
Oh,
was.
it was, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we don't have to do anything with that, right?
No.
We agree with it.
We agree.
Yes.
More revenue.
Yes.
Ah.
Okay. Any other discussion for park and rec?
Unless
Okay.
we're gonna be back at Milchell Playground, that's what we want.
Next line item is Memorial Park
Yeah.
trustees.
It's overfunded by about $700.
Well, judging by
No.
the turn back.
We need the flags. We need those flags.
Is everyone okay with just having an expense line 30? And no salary?
It'll
Yes.
save us time.
Exactly, okay. And then we come to Needham Council for Arts and Culture. I guess. Let's just have a discussion about the merits. I mean, do people think it's, the reason why it's in here is because we had the discussion about the proposed DSR 5. Is it, do we believe it should be in the budget or not?
I was a little confused as to where these monies were gonna be spent, whereas, and Louise, you know this better than me because you've done it, but when you were chair of the cultural council, people would make recommendations and requests and for grants from the cultural council. You would have the money from the state and you would make those grants.
So the state has very specific guidelines on what the grant monies can be used for. And so we would review all the grant applications and determine whether or not they fit within the guidelines and then allocate the money.
Right. Now, the thing with this, as I
There are no
understood it,
guidelines.
from the notes I took notes, that this additional $8,000, 8,300,
Mhm.
is going to be used not just for grants. As I understand it, the way it was explained to me, is that they would use some of these monies for the agency themselves.
So we did a lot of fundraising. So we put on like a Spring Arts Festival, New Year's Need'em, just other activities. And for those, we did fundraising. And those do cost money. But I mean, I don't know very specifically what they're looking to do.
So I agree with
See,
Jim's.
it's the second part. So this will allow the NCAC to provide supplemental funding across multiple rounds of grant applications. Got it. That's basically to give out more grants. And it-
But I have an issue with that because the
well, can we,
state has.
before you have that issue, can we go to the other issue?
Yeah,
And then it says, and do more long-term planning and implementation of community art projects and events.
mhm.
That to me sounds like, and I asked the question, that this was going to be internal. So the new organization used to be Cultural Council, now it's whatever it
Freedom
is.
Council for Arts and Culture.
Yes, that they were going to use the funds themselves.
Mhm.
So it's not for grants,
Mhm.
but they would use the funds. So for example, they may put on an art show themselves, they'll put on an art show, not that they'll give a grant to Joe Blow to have an art show,
Correct.
they'll put it on.
Mhm.
So that to me was the difference. But go ahead, Louise.
So I actually think that's just, like putting the Spring Arts Festival on. Tents are required, potentially, custodians, other things. So that would help that council defray those costs without fundraising. So that to me is okay, so long as, they're promoting arts and culture in Needham. With respect to grants, though, I think you need a structure by which grants are going to be given out. And so I think we would need to know what they're planning on doing with the funds.
So my notes again, I wrote it right here.
Yeah,
One,
I wasn't there, those are you.
give more grants. Two, the committee will use it themselves. And so well, that's my question. So my concern was, for what? And one example that was given is they may do something with the Thorpe Road, Gorse Mill.
Oh, yeah, with the potters at the mill, yeah.
Correct. And so some of the people that are on this council would then have an event with them.
Mhm.
And some of the people from the Gorse Mill project are part of the council.
Yeah.
And some of the artisans are part of the council.
Mhm.
So they would use it internally. And my
So they
only
can't
question
use it
about
for
that might,
themselves.
right, and so that I was a little bit concerned about. It's one thing to have a set of criteria for grants and then to give out the grants. It's
Right.
another thing to have criteria for yourselves.
Right,
And that's kind of where I was a little bit stymied.
so we should ask them for their criteria.
Okay. I think it's a great idea. Can we do that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, we can add
I
it to
was
next week.
chair of that committee for many years.
Ah. Good night, Needham, right?
That, good night, Needham, that was my, yeah.
Um,
Yep.
Okay, so we'll ask more about the NCAC next week.
First night.
Okay,
Good night.
those are the departments. Is there anything anyone wants to go back to now? Or should we hold off until next week?
I would definitely hold on. There's been so much discussed tonight. We don't want to rush anything. Judge.
So are we thinking of having the superintendent next week?
I would like to.
Okay.
have them in there.
Town manager?
So I think the three items we want to discuss, well, two with the town manager, understanding the DEI warrant article, we could even put that warrant article on as a discussion. Also the NCAC, understanding better that, speak with the superintendent, and then lastly, we need to vote on the draft budget.
So we're, as part of this process, we're going to defer action on the ESR fives that are listed here, or what? We're going to wait till they come in, because part of this, again, is why on some of these part of the operating budget, like the Nifty support thing, which we know is going to be a year-over-year activity.
So the Nifties, what happened with the discussion about the Nifties fund, enterprise fund or? fee?
The reason it's a warrant article is, it's the nature of, it's sort of like the facility maintenance plan, the work goes over the fiscal year basis, and it's more,
So that is not correct. If that is what you're being told, that is not correct. The report has to be done once a year and monies have to be expended for the work to be done during that fiscal year.
the,
Yeah, I know, that's what.
the other aspect of the question of that, the select board, there's still a proposal to bring forward this, the special stormwater stabilization fund.
Right.
And fee, and that's a public hearing, that the select board has to happen, and the purpose of that is to provide funding for capital specific. Prior to COVID, what we were looking is some of the capital projects to be funded by the stormwater fee, and the funds would be directed to the stormwater stabilization fund, and then that'd be the appropriation source for capital. The operational costs and drains, that would continue to be supported by the tax levy.
And then should be in the operating budget.
These 195,000, these are not operational, are they? These are,
Well, they could be deemed it was more of the timing of the work that would cross over fiscal year, but yes, it's operational in nature.
then I kind of agree. I mean, this has, I don't know. Originally, I think the finance committee requested that it be outside the budget, because we wanted to just see if it was,
Correct.
you know, something that we needed to fund fully every year. But I think we've settled on that it does, right?
Oh,
It
yes,
does.
yeah, it's not going away. That's why they include multiple years with their submission. There's the department, they identified they have it for this year, 23, and 24, and 25. It's an ongoing expense.
And the 195, I mean, it says it will be sought on an annual basis.
That's
To
correct.
inspect and evaluate, to clean the brooks and culverts, to rehabilitate the catch basin, and to respond to findings. So they're gonna have to do that annually.
Correct.
And if it were in the budget on a recurring basis, I guess it wouldn't matter as much that it crosses over fiscal years, because we have that same amount. in the
Well,
fiscal year.
Logistically, they just have to be a little more careful in the planning, that they have to.
But they have to do that because that's how the report is structured.
Yeah.
For NIPSIs.
But again, it would have to be that the work has to be done on June 30th. The contractor can't do the work on July 1st. That's what I mean by the logistic. It's if the world ends on June 30th and starts all over on July 1st. And that's where the complication comes with some of the projects. But certainly if we would put it into the sewer enterprise fund.
It actually should be, I don't think it should be in the enterprise fund.
That's where the all the training is.
All right,
And then we have a general fund contribution.
Why don't we
it's,
have
yeah,
the Nifty's article next week as well?
yeah, let's talk about that.
And the $1 million for the facilities maintenance is a spending timeframe issue, because
Well, that
Yeah.
definitely is, because particularly a
to
lot of it.
line
tends to
up
be-
the work and so forth.
Well, the schoolwork and stuff like
Yeah.
that, if the schools can only be
Yeah.
done from
Okay,
June 20th to August.
And we
the third
reduce
week of
span
August.
2 fiscal years.
Yeah.
So,
Is it the same thing then for the parking study in RTS? It's gonna go
Well,
beyond?
the parking study and stuff, that's a one-time
Yeah.
expense. And
Gotcha.
quite frankly, to artificially get that, say to the contractor that you hire, we can be done by June 30th.
Okay.
Or you want to have the public hearing the second week of July, can't do it because the budget's gone. That's what the
Gotcha.
operating budget ends on June 30th. The contract has to be done on.
Fair
June
response.
30th.
Okay, and the same thing with the RTS service model study?
Yes, the same thing, you're hiring the consultant
Thank you.
to look at.
I think that's busy enough for next week.
So there's gonna be a reserve fund transfer request.
Yes, it's the special election cost. We got all the cost in now and Teddy gave me an accounting. And I'll have to reserve fund transfer to cover that expense because the budget for fiscal 22 can't carry that cost.
Okay.
And it's it's just under $18,000. And then I was gonna give the committee a snow and ice update.
Oh, I'd like that, yes.
Where we stand.
Thank you.
Any damage to the equipment, I'd love to know that too.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, with that, would it be appropriate to have a motion to adjourn?
Unless there are any updates anyone else has? Yes.
Yeah, but, so I would make that motion.
I second it.
Any discussion? We'll do a roll call, Barry,
Yes. Enthusiasm.
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yeah, oh, yes.
John,
Of course.
Carol,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody. I will be there.